They came across the ocean in silence. The waves slapped against the hull of the transport ship, each one marking a heartbeat of defeat. For many of the German prisoners of war packed below deck, it was their first time seeing America, not as conquerors, but as captives. The journey had been long. From the ruins of North Africa, from the snows of France, from the fields of Italy, they had been gathered up like the broken remnants of an army that once dreamed of ruling the world. Now the Atlantic was their corridor of surrender. When the ship finally reached the American coast, the men pressed against the portholes. What they saw was bewildering. Cities still standing, roads alive with trucks and cars, and people, smiling, well-fed, carefree. No rubble, no hunger, no blackouts. The guards herded them onto trains that cut through miles of open countryside, past fields of golden wheat, red barns, and small towns where children waved at the passing POW cars. For men who'd grown used to ruins, it was almost unreal. When they arrived at the camp, somewhere in the wide plains of Texas, the gates didn't look like prison gates. There were fences, yes, but inside, there were barracks, sports fields, even a library. And then came the biggest surprise, the food. At noon, the bell rang for lunch. The prisoners were marched to the mess hall, still stiff with pride. Most hadn't eaten properly in days. They expected watery soup, maybe stale bread, the kind of rations they'd been giving their own captives back in Europe. But what they saw on the trays made them frown in confusion. Meat stew, real chunks of beef swimming in gravy, white bread so soft it almost collapsed in their hands, butter, actual butter, gleaming like gold, and coffee steaming and rich. It was too much, too generous. "This is a trick," one soldier muttered. "They want to fatten us before they use us." Another spat into his stew. "This is civilian food. Slop for children." They sat, silent and bitter, chewing through each bite as if it were humiliation. The flavors were strange, too sweet, too rich, too different from the hard black bread and salted pork of the Wehrmacht. They hated it. They hated that their enemies could live like this while their families starved back home. That night, as the guards cleared the trays, one American cook, a Navy veteran named Bill Thompson, overheard the German complaints. He laughed softly and shook his head. "They don't know what they're missing," he said to another cook. "Maybe I'll fix something special next week. Something they can't sneer at." It was a small comment, but that moment and that decision would change the way those prisoners saw America forever. Because next Friday, the mess hall would serve fish and chips, and nothing would ever taste the same again. The first few days in the camp felt strange for the German prisoners. They expected cruelty, maybe hunger, but instead, they got clean clothes, soft beds, and food 3 times a day. Yet, instead of gratitude, many felt anger. To them, American food looked and smelled wrong. It was too soft, too sweet, and far too much. The bread was white like snow, not dark and heavy like back home. The coffee was strong, but they missed the bitter taste of German brew. Even the butter felt unnecessary, like luxury on a prisoner's plate. Each day they lined up in the mess hall, trays in hand, faces cold and proud. The cooks served them beef stew, mashed potatoes, corn, and pudding. The Germans stared at it, whispering among themselves. "Too much," one said. "They waste everything." "This is not soldiers' food," another grumbled. "This is children's food." Most ate only a little, just enough to quiet their hunger. They missed their army rations. Hard bread, sausage, cabbage soup. Simple, harsh, and familiar. The Americans watched quietly. To them, food was comfort, not insult. They didn't understand why the prisoners were so cold. One night, a German sergeant named Franz sat by the window, staring out at the dark fields. "Back home," he said softly to the man beside him, "we can't even find bread. My wife waits in line for hours, and here we throw food away." His voice cracked a little. He didn't know whether to feel angry or ashamed. The next morning, word spread that the American cook, a cheerful man with gray hair named Bill Thompson, was planning something new. Fish and chips, someone said. The Germans laughed. Fish and what? They didn't know it yet, but that simple meal would soon change everything they thought they knew about America and about kindness. Friday came with the smell of frying oil drifting through the camp. It was new, warm, salty, and somehow comforting. The German prisoners noticed it at once. Some sniffed the air curiously, others wrinkled their noses. In the kitchen, Bill Thompson, the American cook, worked with his small team. He had asked for something special that morning: crates of fresh fish, sacks of potatoes, and a few bottles of vinegar. It was his idea to serve the Germans a real American meal, something simple but full of heart. As lunch approached, the mess hall filled with noise. The prisoners lined up as usual, not expecting much. When the first man reached the counter, he froze. On his tray went 2 golden pieces of fried fish, a pile of crisp chips, and a wedge of lemon. The smell was rich and tempting. The man stared, confused. "What is this?" he asked. "Fish and chips," Bill said with a grin. "Try it hot." The German took his tray and sat down, looking at the food like it was a test. Around him, others did the same. Some laughed quietly, calling it American trick food. Others refused to touch it. But then, someone took a bite. The crunch echoed through the hall. Then came a quiet pause, and another bite, and another. Soon, heads began to lift, and faces started to change. The fish was soft inside, wrapped in a golden crust that melted with each bite. The potatoes were warm, salty, and perfect. A few brave ones tried the vinegar. Sharp, strange, but good. By the end of the meal, the room was silent. Not from anger this time, but from surprise. One man whispered, almost to himself, This tastes like home, like something made with care." For the first time, the German prisoners didn't feel like enemies at the table. They just felt human. After that first taste, something quiet filled the room. No one spoke much, but the mood had changed. For weeks, the German prisoners had eaten in silence, angry at their defeat, angry at the food, angry at everything. But today felt different. Men who used to push their trays away were now finishing every crumb. The sound of forks scraping plates replaced the usual complaints. The smell of fried fish lingered in the air, warm and comforting. Bill Thompson stood near the counter, pretending to clean while watching them eat. He smiled to himself. "Told you they'd like it," he whispered to another cook. At one of the long tables, Sergeant Franz took a bite and closed his eyes. The taste brought back a memory. His mother cooking carp on Christmas Eve, oil popping in a pan, the smell of home before the war. For the first time in months, he didn't feel like a soldier or a prisoner. Just a man remembering better days. This is good," he finally said, almost surprised at his own words. The man beside him nodded. "Ja, very good." When the meal ended, many Germans walked out of the hall quietly, deep in thought. A few even said thank you to the guards, something no one had heard before. That evening, the camp felt different. Laughter came from the barracks. Some of the men shared stories about food back home. A few even tried to copy the recipe, talking about how they would cook fish this way when they returned to Germany. Bill, sitting by the kitchen door, listened and smiled. He hadn't planned to change anything. He just wanted to make them a good meal. But somehow, that simple dish had done what words and orders never could. It broke the wall between enemies. And for one night, the war felt far away. The next day, the prisoners couldn't stop talking about the fish and chips. In the morning roll call, laughter spread through the lines. Someone joked that maybe America was trying to win the war by feeding them too well. Even the guards smiled. At lunch, when a different meal was served, a few Germans asked shyly, "When will we have the fish again?" The cooks laughed and promised, "Maybe next Friday." Something had changed. The mess hall was no longer just a place to eat. It had become a place where men spoke like normal people again. The bitterness that filled the air before had begun to fade. One afternoon, Sergeant Franz helped carry boxes into the kitchen. He thanked Bill Thompson, the cook, for the meal the day before. Bill chuckled, handing him a potato. "You want to learn how to make it yourself?" Franz hesitated, then nodded. Within minutes, a few German prisoners were standing in aprons, peeling potatoes, laughing at their clumsy English. Bill showed them how to slice the chips just right, how to dip the fish in batter, and how to drop it carefully into hot oil. The kitchen filled with laughter and the crackle of frying food. When the meal was ready, everyone, guards and prisoners, tasted it together. Someone even found an old radio, and music played softly in the background. For a little while, it didn't feel like a war camp anymore. It felt like a small town kitchen, full of warmth and life. Later that night, Franz sat by his bunk and said to his friend, "You know, they treat us better than our own officers did." His friend nodded slowly. "Maybe we didn't know them at all." In that quiet moment, both men realized something new. Sometimes, kindness can win battles that bullets never could. Days turned into weeks, and the German prisoners grew stronger and healthier. The guards noticed the difference. Faces that once looked pale and angry now carried a bit of color and even a few smiles. The American cooks kept serving hearty meals: warm bread, butter, beans, pies, and sometimes that special fish and chips everyone loved. The Germans began to help in the kitchen, the fields, and even fixing fences. It was hard work, but it gave them purpose. One afternoon, while peeling potatoes, Franz told Bill, "In Germany, we thought Americans were cold and proud. But you're kind." Bill shrugged with a grin. "Food does that, friend. Makes people forget who's supposed to hate who." Slowly, the distance between guards and prisoners began to fade. They started exchanging stories about home, about families, farms, and old dreams before the war. Franz showed Bill a small picture of his wife and son. Bill took out a photo of his own family. For a moment, the two men just looked at each other and smiled. In the evenings, the POWs sometimes played music using handmade instruments. The guards listened quietly from outside the barracks. One night, when a soft German tune floated through the camp, an American soldier said, "It sounds sad but peaceful." Another nodded. "Yeah, maybe they miss home like we do." By then, no one called the food punishment anymore. The same fish and chips that had once been mocked now brought everyone together: prisoners and guards, enemies and men alike. Franz often thought about that meal. "Funny," he said one night, "it wasn't a gun or a speech that changed us. It was just food." And somewhere in the heart of that quiet Texas camp, humanity quietly returned, one plate at a time. As the war drew closer to its end, the German prisoners in Texas began writing more letters home. The Red Cross helped send them through, though it took months for messages to reach their families. Franz sat at a wooden table one cool morning, a pen shaking in his hand. He hadn't written to his wife, Greta, in nearly a year. For so long, he had been ashamed, captured, defeated, and sent to a land he once called the enemies. But now things felt different. He began to write, "My dearest Greta, you will not believe where I am. It is America, a place I feared. But they treat us well. The guards are fair, and the food is something else. At first, we thought they were trying to make us suffer with greasy, heavy meals. Then one day, we had something called fish and chips. It changed everything. We laughed, we ate, and for the first time, I forgot about the war. I saw kindness in the faces of men who should have hated us." As he wrote, he could almost smell the fried fish and warm potatoes again. He remembered the laughter at the table, the sound of music in the evenings, and the way Bill, the cook, always said, "Good food makes good hearts." Other prisoners wrote similar letters about the meals, the fair treatment, and how America was not the cruel land they had imagined. Some asked if their families were safe. Some shared hope that when they returned home, they would bring back more than memories. They would bring back the lesson that even in war, kindness can survive. That night, when the letters were collected, Franz whispered, "Maybe someday Greta will taste fish and chips too." He smiled softly, folded the letter, and handed it to the guard. "Danke," he said, and "thank you." The guard smiled back. "For what?" Franz replied, "For showing me that even enemies can share a meal and a little bit of peace." The war finally ended, and ships began taking German prisoners back across the Atlantic. Franz stood at the harbor, holding his small bag of belongings. The Texas sun was hot on his back, but his heart felt light. He was going home, not as a soldier, but as a changed man. On the ship, the men talked about what they would do once they reached Germany. Some wanted to find their families. Others wanted to rebuild their towns. But many, like Franz, spoke about food. "I'll open a small cafe," said one man. "I'll serve that American dish, fish and chips. My children will taste it." They laughed, imagining their neighbors' faces when they tried fried fish for the first time. When Franz finally arrived in his hometown, everything looked smaller, quieter, and tired. Buildings were broken and people walked with hollow eyes. Greta ran to him, crying, when she saw him at the door. "You're home," she said. "You're really home." That night, they sat together, sharing a simple meal of bread and soup. Franz told her stories of Texas, the vast fields, the kind guards, and the strange dish that changed how he saw everything. Greta listened closely. "You mean you thought it was bad, but it wasn't?" she asked. Franz smiled. "Yes, we thought it was punishment, but it was a gift. That food showed me something, that even in war, people can still care." In the months that followed, Franz did open a small cafe. It was called Der Friedensfisch, the Peace Fish. He served fish and chips just like Bill had taught him. People came from nearby towns to try it. Some said it tasted like hope. Years later, when children asked about the war, Franz would smile and say, "I learned that sometimes peace begins with a meal."